Today we're out here in sunny Southern California with this, the all-new Mazda CX-50.
This is part of Mazda's move to make their brand more upscale, more premium in the United States. So while you could cross-shop this with a RAV4 or a CR-V, Mazda would also love you to cross-shop this against a Buick Envision and an Acura RDX. You know, Brian, the most interesting thing for me about the CX-50 is that Mazda says that they're not replacing the CX-5 with this model. This is adding a new, more rugged dimension to the CX lineup.
Exactly. They said loud and clear the CX-5 will be living on beside this model in the lineup, but I think this is definitely a good look if you want the one that looks more rugged, more tough. They said going forward, their SUVs and crossovers are going to have this sort of tough and powerful look, as they called it. And I think with the black treatment you see here, it looks really good and fitting for that design choice.
Yeah, and still very distinguishable as a Mazda. This is still a variant of the Kodo design language, so all the shapes are very familiar. We have the very BMW-like angel, rings there in the LED headlights here. We have the big Mazda grille here, but it's actually split now on the sides here with a separate little lip on top, and kind of, I guess, a Nissan U-shape right there in the middle in black in this model. Lots of body cladding because, again, this is supposed to be not just the more premium CX-5, I guess you could say, but also the more rugged CX-5. LED turn signals right down there at the bottom of the bumper.
Yeah, and one thing we don't really know for sure yet is whether or not all of them will have this black grille treatment. Some of the lower models might come with a brighter color trim, but I think if they're going to keep this model specifically being the outdoorsy one, I think they all probably will be sticking with this one, but we'll have to see.
We do know, however, that there's going to be an even more off-roady version coming soon, the Meridian trim, and that's going to get a very Subaru Wilderness-like black graphic right on the hood.
That's right. So with the mission of making this model the most off-road oriented in the lineup, they've gone with more squared off wheel arches, the wider tires, up to 8.6 inches of ground clearance, and on that upcoming Meridian model, 18-inch wheels with even beefier tires, in the same vein as Subaru's Forester Wilderness or the Outback Wilderness trim levels.
As with most Mazdas, the CX-50 is going to come with a ton of active driver assistance tech standard. Radar adaptive cruise control with low speed follow, autonomous emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, lane keeping assistance, and driver attention monitoring. Those are all standard. But interestingly enough, you have to walk all the way up to the most expensive version if you want the 360-degree camera, front and rear parking sensors, and rear autonomous emergency braking. Adding to the premium flair, we have full LED tail lamps. Most mainstream crossovers have combination lamps where there's an incandescent element or two in there, and Mazda has been doing full LED tail lamps for a while. These really help dress things up, very similar U-shapes to what's going on in the front headlight.
Yeah, and the rear is where you can really see the difference between this and the CX-5. This is much lower and wider, and it's accentuated by the wide fender flares and these pretty wide fake air vents you see right here on the sides.
Yeah, what do you think about these fake air vents? I am not the biggest fan.
Up close, they're not great to look at, but from far away, like if you're behind the car, they do make the car look really nice and sporty.
I am, however, a big fan of the dual exhaust tips at the bottom that are still visible, and just the subtle amount. This is not actually chrome, this is just sort of shiny silver plastic right there that helps dress things up in the back a little bit.
I don't know about you guys, but with the CX-9, they gave it a nice little chrome strip across here, but there's not one here, which makes it kind of look a little bit plain to me. Let us know what you think about that. I think it could use a little bit more something else going on up there.
It's the rugged off-roady look, Brian.
I know.
Chrome is not off-roady, apparently, which is interesting because if you look around the side, we'll bring the camera around here again, there's only like one tiny little bit of chrome on the side.
And that bit of chrome he's talking about is right back here at the end of the greenhouse. Normally in other Mazdas, that chrome continues along the beltline, but they just decided to stick it right there at the end with a D-pillar.
As you'd expect out of a premium vehicle, we have hood struts rather than a prop rod, but we find the engine lineup out of the Mazda CX-5.
Exactly, so that's two 2.5-liter four-cylinder engines. The naturally aspirated base engine is 187 horsepower, 186 pound-feet of torque. The turbocharged version gets up to 256 horsepower if you fill it with the nicest fuel, and 320 pound-feet of torque. And all of them are all-wheel drive.
That's true. All-wheel drive is now standard, and the transmission is still a 6-speed automatic transmission, which is a few gears shy versus the competition, especially if you want to compare this to something like an RDX, which has nearly twice the number of gears. Now, I did want to address one thing, because this is a question I get asked all the time. Does this have some sort of octane sensor, etc., to tell whether it gets regular or premium, and exactly how much power are you going to get what? The answer is no. Like all modern engines, it detects basically what kind of fuel you're running on with an advanced knock sensor. So if there is a little bit of pre-ignition going on, then the vehicle will dial back the timing. So here's how it goes. On a cold winter day, regardless of the kind of fuel you feed this engine, you should be getting 256 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque. But if it's a really hot day outside, say you're out here in Southern California and it's 105 in the summer, then that same fuel is probably going to give you 227 horsepower. If you're looking for the most fuel-efficient entry in the segment, at least for the moment, it's not going to be the CX-50, although who knows what will happen when we find the upcoming hybrid system under here.
Exactly, but for the time being, it's about 25 combined for this model and 27 for the naturally aspirated four-cylinder.
And 25 for a turbocharged engine that's producing this much power isn't too bad. Keep in mind, 256 horsepower is pretty darn powerful for a mainstream vehicle like this. If you want more power than this and you want to go 0 to 60 faster, you're going to be looking at something like a Toyota RAV4 Prime, and that's basically it.
Mazda really wants drivers to be able to tow with their CX-50, so the maximum towing capacity is 3,500 pounds with the turbo model here. The naturally aspirated model is only 2,000 pounds, but that 3,500 pounds figure is on par with RAV4 and about 1,000 pounds less than Jeep Cherokee.
The front seats proved pretty comfortable over a day of driving, but for a vehicle that has more of a premium mission in mind, I was surprised that the front driver's seat does not have a four-way lumbar support and the passenger seat does not have any adjustable lumbar, and it also doesn't have a tilting seat bottom cushion. We do, however, have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and two-position driver's seat memory. Rear seat legroom is definitely very generous. We have 81.5 inches of combined legroom, pretty similar to CR-V and Tucson, 3 more inches than we find in RAV4. This is also good when compared against some near luxury crossovers like the Acura RDX. Moving over to the middle position here, my head is definitely brushing against the ceiling, but that doesn't happen in the outboard seating positions. This interior at least feels like it's a little bit wider than the CX-5. I haven't been able to get good measurements on that just yet, but it does feel like the doors are a little bit further apart. With this front seat all the way back in its tracks, you can see that I have several inches of legroom left, and even with this large panoramic moonroof, I still have a reasonable amount of headroom. Behind the second row seats, we find a pretty generous cargo area, 30.2 cubic feet in most models, 29.6 in the upper end trims. One thing that I was surprised by, however, this model, at least the one that they were giving us, does not have any sort of roller kind of cargo shade, although obviously this was designed for one. As we see in other Mazda models, there's some handy handles back here to help you fold the rear seats from the cargo area. You can also do that from the passenger area. One nice touch, especially since this has off-roading aspirations, we do have a spare tire under the load floor. You can see this is also where they put the Bose subwoofer, and that could be why cargo area reduces in the top end trims. There is a tiny bit of additional storage space around the side. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is the very top end trim. Up here just above the rear view mirror, we have a little readout to tell you who's buckled in the back, sunglass holder right here, and we have sun visors with extending sides but no sliding sun visor. This is again the first Mazda model with a full panoramic glass moonroof, which does extend to just about over the rear passengers' laps, not quite their heads. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. This interior has a very attractive two-tone theme where the bulk of the leather is a terracotta color. I'm not exactly clear what this one's called. We then have some charcoal inserts with some contrasting stitching right there, and the theme continues over to the doors where we have a bit more charcoal and then a splash of that terracotta color. Over on the passenger side, you can see this much more dramatic style with the air vent that is sort of canted towards the passenger, Bose speakers right there on the door, and then a very linear theme to the dashboard that reminds me a lot of the Mazda 3 hatchback and the Mazda 3 sedan, also perhaps a little bit of current generation Civic. My only problem with this particular design is this little air vent that the passenger is staring at all the time. I think it's interesting that Mazda decided to have this little cutout here, or a little dish in for that air vent. Now I understand it makes the air flow a little bit better, but I kind of wish this vent had been a little bit longer, maybe a little bit sleeker, and had the dashboard be truly horizontal. Now right up here at the top of the dashboard, we have something very unusual for Mazda. It is an actual touchscreen. But there's a catch. If I go over to the native Mazda interface, this does not touch. In fact, it only touches when I'm in CarPlay. I can't even go back into CarPlay while touching the screen. I have to use the controller in the center console here. Then I can go into CarPlay and then I can touch the screen. This also works for Android Auto, and it does support wireless smartphone integration. The rest of the infotainment system is pretty similar to what was seen in Mazdas since the Mazda 3. Moving down from there, we have another air vent similar to what we find on the passenger side, again canted a little bit towards the person it's aiming at, in this case the driver. Below that, we have the dual zone automatic climate control here. This is not standard in the base model. It is a single zone climate control system. Heated steering wheel, heated seats, ventilated seats right there. We have a very minimalist center console, so the climate controls occupy a very small amount of real estate there. There's a dish in, 12-volt power port, little knick-knack holder right there, 2 large cup holders, and a pretty standard shifter. There's a manual mode over to the left. There's the drive mode selector right here next to that gives us the 3 selectable drive modes in this model. If a trailer was connected, there would be another drive mode for trailering. We then have the electric parking brake, auto brake hold, and then the controller for that infotainment system. One thing that is very Audi-like here is that not only do we have this little controller, we have a little toggle for track forward, backward. This also acts as the volume knob. There's a little favorites button right next to it. The center armrest opens in a bifold fashion, but there are 2 buttons, so you can open each side individually. With that open, you'll see the Qi wireless charge mat. It is fairly narrow, so some smartphones may have difficulty charging in that mat. In the center console, this is where we have 2 USB inputs, definitely enough room to store your smartphone and other little knickknacks like cleaning cloths. On the driver's side, we have a heads-up display in this model, and it's not a little sheet of plastic that flips up. It is a true windshield projection heads-up display, but you'll only find that in the very top-end trim. Just below that, the one thing that did surprise me is we don't find a full LCD instrument cluster, like it would appear that we'll see in the CX-50 and CX-90. Instead, this instrument cluster is very similar to what we find in the Mazda 3. Physical tachometer on the left, 7-inch display in the middle that gives us a variety of different displays, configurable via the steering wheel here. It also changes themes just a little bit based on the drive mode that you're in. And then we have the engine temperature and fuel gauge on the right side. The steering wheel continues to be a round 3-spoke design. Again, it's tilt telescopic. On the left side, we find infotainment controls. On the right side, we find controls for the adaptive cruise control system. And there's one button that toggles through those menu options. First things first, let's talk about the 0 to 60 performance times. Last time I was in the CX-5, we got what, Brian?
6.5 seconds?
Yep, and this is a little heavier than the CX-5 Turbo. So I suspect this is probably gonna be at least, 2/10 of a second, maybe 3/10 of a second slower, something like that.
Yeah, it feels right around there, I think.
It definitely has a good solid feel to it, but it's not going to be as fast as some of the competition. So I do think that something like the Ford Escape, the 2-liter turbo, that is a little bit swifter than this. It's also a bit more powerful if you're not running on premium unleaded.
Mm-hmm. And then the Acura RDX, though that is heavier than this, I believe you got a faster time in that as well.
Yes, because that has that 10-speed automatic and it has a really low first gear. You're certainly going to notice that in straight line takeoff. So if I just slow down or come to a stop here, right here on this road, and you floor it, you will definitely notice a few things. The first thing you'll notice is that first gear is not as aggressive as in the RDX. There's a lot of mid-range pull. The second thing you'll notice, especially earlier in the day when we were towing a trailer, is that there's a pretty decent gap between first and second gear. So you rev all the way up in first gear, and then the car falls really pretty low below its torque curve in that shift to second.
While not the fastest in this price category or even this size category, this is perfectly swift enough for the average consumer who's going to be looking for something like this.
Yeah, it has a really good punchy mid-range feel, which has always been Mazda's selling shtick for this engine, is that it's not about the 0 to 60 performance they claim. It's about that feel that you get while passing and hill climbing and that sort of thing. And I will definitely agree with them that that really feels good. You will also notice, if you dare to take this mild off-roading, as you know, Mazda had us do actually for quite some time today, which is why the car is now really, really dusty, you will certainly notice the extra power versus something like the Forester Wilderness out on those tracks. The turbo engine has a ton of low-end torque, and even if I'm not the biggest fan of the gear ratios involved, that really was noticeable. I think it's mainly in straight line acceleration where you will notice the lack of gears, this versus something like the RDX, or I would say the Ford Escape.
And you'll also probably notice it in fuel economy. That higher end, if you're cruising on the highway, is probably not going to be as efficient just because it's not going to be able to hold the lower RPMs like those models do. But yeah, on the low end too, you can definitely feel the tuning. It's just not as sprightly as those 10-speed, even 8 speeds.
But I will say that the rest of the CX-50 has a very engaging feel to it. This one has 245 with tires on it. Outside the CX-9, these are some of the widest tires that Mazda has ever put on anything. Now they are optional, you'll only find them on the turbo model, but I think it really helps make this feel more engaging out on the road. Obviously we don't have any stopping scores, we'll have to get those once we get this back at home. Expect this to be similar to the CX-5. It has wider tires, but again, it's heavier.
And I have to say, through the corners, it does a really good job of, once you're not pushing it to its limit, staying very planted. It's very, very controlled, very balanced, and I don't feel like, I'm being pushed out to the side too far. These seats hold you in place pretty nicely, at least for me personally.
When the road starts to bend, as it is here, the turn-in is really nice and natural. It's very easy to tell exactly what the car is doing. And when things do get a little pear-shaped, it's also easy to tell what's going on and easy to recover from. And in most of the vehicles in this segment, they're honestly pretty numb up front. Another thing that helps out the handling that I didn't expect is that Mazda says the rear axle is overdriven by 1% versus the front. So this has the ability to send a little bit more power to the rear. If you floor it in corners like this, you won't exactly notice that same sort of rear end swing out that you can get in an Acura RDX, but you will notice that this feels more planted in these same kind of maneuvers versus a Honda CR-V or the Hyundai Tucson.
And if you are off-roading or towing, I believe they told us that there was no front-wheel drive mode only. It's always going to be locked in all-wheel drive. Whereas in normal or sport mode like this, there's a chance you'll be back in front-wheel drive only mode at some point. But that was really helpful with the off-road course we got to do.
Yeah, and of course, if you put it in sport mode, you're going to notice a little bit more power sent to the rear, a little bit more eager throttle response, but there's not an enormous difference between these 3 drive modes, and Mazda claims that that was by design. And I think this road surface is a good way to tell the viewers about the next thing we should talk about, which is the ride quality. This is certainly firm. So this has the ground clearance practically of a Subaru Wilderness product, but it has a very on-road design suspension. And this suspension tune actually reminds me an awful lot of, say, a Volvo, because Volvo tends to do the same sort of thing. They have high ground clearance because the company's in Sweden and they deal with snow and muddy situations, things like that. So the cars are designed for that. But the rational pragmatist in them says cars are driven mainly on the road. So this suspension is tuned for the road with the ground height for off-roading, and the result is definitely something firmer than we find in the Subaru line.
And of course, keep in mind, we are riding on 20-inch wheels in this particular model, and then on that upcoming Meridian, more rugged version, there will be smaller 18-inch wheels with thicker rubber, so that could affect the ride quality significantly, or it could be very minimal. We'll have to see. But
I'm really intrigued by that Meridian model, I have to say, because it does sound like they're trying to do the full-on wilderness thing, and Mazda has generally not had a huge off-road presence as far as in buyers' minds, but they have long had enough ground clearance that I was not worried about that rock that was right there in the middle of the road at all, because this is quite high off the road. But if I were in something like a last generation RAV4, that rock probably would have been a problem. Perhaps it's because of the wider tires that we find on this model versus other Mazda models, but this cabin seems a little louder than I had expected.
Yeah, I totally agree, Alex. I think this is a little bit too loud for what I would expect from a premium car. It's not like a ton of wind noise per se. It's just the road imperfections and the patches and the things like that. We're feeling them and we're hearing them, and I don't know, I feel like there should be a slightly bit more isolation to it than that.
Yeah, I have to admit being torn, because of course the promise of this is that it is luxury for mainstream prices. So obviously that's not really possible, right? So it's like, you got to have the sound deadening, got to have everything to the next level, and that costs money. But here there are just a few compromises if you want to make that RDX, NX, Audi Q5 comparison.
But it is impressive that we are able to make that comparison in the first place. I mean, a couple years ago you were not comparing.
With a straight face.
Exactly. You weren't comparing Mazdas to even Buicks, and this is a very sporty ride, very competent ride, and a Buick is going to be softer than this, but they want you to compare this to something like an Envision, and I think this is going to be the more well-rounded of the two.
Yeah, and I have to say again, the first part of the day we spent on some really winding roads, and the thing that kept coming to my mind was this kind of feels like a Volvo XC40 to me. As I said before, for the usual battery of comparisons and tests and scores, you're going to have to wait until we get this at home, but I can say that over a day of mixed driving, we've been averaging 21.7 mpg. Now, that has been going up and over some pretty steep mountain passes here, because we started in Santa Barbara, we went 120 miles inland, and now we're driving all the way back. We also drove this off-road. Not the most difficult off-road trails, if I'm perfectly honest, mainly dirt road and dust road with a little bit of incline and some moguls, etc. This has the kind of suspension where if you were really going to rugged off-road it, you might really start regretting that after a while, simply because of the firmness of the ride. But I suspect 25 mpg is probably going to be achievable at home.
Absolutely, and of course, if you do want a more fuel-efficient version of this car and the rest of it is really spoken to you really like the design and the ruggedness of it, there is a hybrid coming. They did confirm that with us today. So that should be an interesting option, but we don't know if that'll be all-wheel drive standard like all the rest of the CX-50s.
Yeah, there are a lot of open-ended questions there. Like Brian was saying earlier, in the theory currently running is that it might be a Toyota hybrid, but that is simply a wild supposition. We don't know anything about that. But it does beg the question where, if this did become a Toyota-based hybrid, would it be the same one that's in the RAV4, and would it get 40 mpg?
I would assume that's the best candidate for it, because that is an all-wheel drive system, or at least optionally it is. And of course, Toyota is partnering with Mazda to build this car. This car is not related at all to the other vehicle, the Corolla Cross, that's built at the Mazda Toyota manufacturing facility, but there's got to be some chance that they are working together on providing that hybrid system. I feel like Toyota is the number one candidate.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that synergy works there, because up till now, Mazda has really resisted partnering with any other auto companies. So every Mazda uses a Mazda transmission and a Mazda engine, and Mazda designs it, Mazda builds it, etc. And now they're exploring out of their bubble with that Mazda plant joint with Toyota. And of course, question mark over future hybrid. Bottom line, out on the road, if you're looking for a driving experience that, much like the exterior design, I would say, is certainly a step above the average in this segment, but not necessarily where we find full-on luxury vehicles, the CX-50 is going to be an excellent option. And I actually think that's a really good statement. I don't think that's a negative thing for the CX-50 at all, because if you want a luxury car and a better driving experience, you have to pay a lot more.
Right, and something that was brought up with the Mazda team today was, why didn't they create more of a rugged version of an existing model like the CX-5 instead of going all in on a brand new model like this and making it be the dedicated off-road version or the off-road offering in their lineup? And they said they really wanted to make sure the customers had a holistic experience, one that is meant for this type of customer, and that's sort of something new and fresh. And I think they've really hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah, and of course to that I would say, in counterpoint to Mazda speak, I would say this is definitely an on-road focused crossover that they want you to look at as a more rugged option in the Mazda lineup. And a lot of that really just has to do with style. They honestly have not tuned this that differently in terms of the general driving dynamics versus the CX-5 or the rest of the lineup. It still is very, very on-road focused as far as the driving dynamics go. That's what makes this so much fun to drive daily. If I were to pick something that I were to live with daily, even though I live out in the country, I would certainly choose this over a Subaru Wilderness. The Subaru Wilderness is going to be more comfortable off-road, and it's going to be more comfortable on rougher roads, but you have to give up a lot for that, and I think this is just better skewed towards on-road driving. According to Mazda, if you want to get your hands on the CX-50, these are going to be on dealer lots right around the time that you're watching this video. Now, how much money are they going to need to bring with them to the dealer?
Well, if you want to get into a base naturally aspirated 4-cylinder version, which is all-wheel drive, all of them are all-wheel drive, even the turbos, that'll be at $26,800, and that can get up all the way to $36,400, which is where the 2.5-liter turbo, which we have here, picks up. That model can go all the way up to $41,550.
That definitely puts this in a bit of overlap with the CX-5, because the CX-5 is a little bit less expensive at the low end, around $25,900 starting, but it goes up to $38,650. Now let's talk about where some key features start in the lineup.
For example, if you want dual zone automatic climate control, that's going to be $28,200.
The minimum point of entry for this power liftgate on this model is $29,500.
And then, much to my excitement, Mazda finally has a panoramic moonroof available, and the lowest price you can get one of those in is at $32,550.
Leather, which is a commonly requested option, that is all up at $34,400.
And then if you want a heads-up display or you want to get into that turbo model, like I mentioned earlier, that's $36,400.
Obviously, you will have to give up a few features if you get the turbo model, but if you want the turbo and the heads-up display, that's $39,559.
And then at the very top end, if you want the 360-degree camera as well as the extra safety features we mentioned earlier, that's that model that's $41,500.
And that is the model that we've been driving today with absolutely everything on it. Now, $41,500, that is still significantly less expensive than a comparably equipped Acura RDX, which I think, honestly, is an incredibly good vehicle to be comparing against the CX-50. I'm torn. I think this might look better than the RDX. What do you think?
I think it does too. I think its lower stance and the wide hips just give it this more sporty, even though it's also off-road combination. I don't know, it looks really good to me.
Yeah, I like the back end of the RDX, I think, a little bit better, but the front end of this is really good looking, and Mazda just has a really great design aesthetic to them. That longer hood proportion that we see in other models, that continues in here, that Mazda grille, the signature LED headlights, etc. To me, that just seems more harmonious than what we find going on with the RDX. What do you think about the Envision?
Well, the Envision I think looks really good too, and actually it's more closely designed to this in terms of its overall shape. It's more squat, it's got that longer hood too, but it's still got the wider hips. But honestly, really quickly, going back to the RDX, the one thing it has over this that we forgot to mention is its panoramic sunroof is standard.
That's true. And this one, you will have to step all the way up there to that $32,000 price point, somewhere around there. But an RDX is going to be a lot more than this starting. So you can go all the way up practically to the top end trim and be well within the price range of absolute base models of the RDX. So do you want the Acura logo? Do you want that luxury car dealer experience? Or would you like a lot of the same features in a Mazda CX-50? Now, speaking of Mazda's move upscale, how do you feel with the fact that we're getting the CX-50 and not the CX-60 that they're getting in Europe, which is not too far removed from this in terms of size, but it's the new rear-wheel drive vehicle that has the plug-in hybrid available under the hood?
So that model is more in the same vein as a CX-5 in terms of its general shape. It definitely has similar proportions. Of course, it's different because it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle, so it's going to have that longer dash-to-axle ratio, and it's going to be narrower than the 70 and 90 models we're getting here, and I believe it's about as narrow as this, or maybe even narrower than this.
Yeah, and they're not trying to be as off-roady without, it doesn't have as much cladding here, etc. It's trying to be a little bit less rugged than this, but I still think it looks good, and I really want to know what that drives like. Of course, for the US, we're going to get the CX-70, which is going to be the American-sized version of the CX-60. Their naming scheme can get a little confusing, so bear with us if we have accidentally mis-CX'd, MX'd, or double-digited anything in this video, I will say that. But I really like the look of this. Now, let's go just sort of a one instant answer here. Would you buy this over a RAV4?
I think I would, yeah. I like the interior a little bit more. It's definitely more premium feeling. It's got nicer interior colors. The off-road look is a little bit better than what Toyota tries to pull off in their off-road trims of the RAV4, at least for me personally, because this is sort of the shinier, more elegant, I think, offering between the two. So.
Yeah, and I would say if off-roading really is your thing, there are definitely going to be more options off-road capable than this, but this is going to do really well compared against something like a Subaru Forester Wilderness, which doesn't have a 2.5-liter turbo under the hood. So this is significantly more powerful, significantly faster, and honestly, just about as off-road capable as that Subaru. So now you pick a random crossover, and let's see if I would buy it over this.
Let's go with the Hyundai Tucson.
Tucson. I like the look of this better than the Tucson. I like the design up front, and you know, to be perfectly honest, this is a really, really good looking crossover, and pretty crossovers sell well. This front end look to me, I think is really good. Do you think it looks different enough versus the other Mazdas?
So I think it's definitely an evolution of what they've been doing for the last couple of years now with their code of design language. The front grille is obviously going to be immediately identifiable, but I like that, like the Mazda 3, it's blacked out, it's got that darker, sort of sportier look in combination with the rugged bits. The whole thing is very well tastefully done, I think. It's just a nice overall look. How about compared to the new Lexus NX?
Ooh, interesting question. I probably would buy this over the Lexus NX, to be perfectly honest. And for me, it's all about value, and that is Mazda's entire proposition, especially with their upper end models like the one that we've been driving right now. $41,550 definitely is on the expensive side for the RAV4 CR-V Tucson crowd, but compared to a Lexus NX, that is really bargain. I think this looks better than the Lexus NX, and although on the inside, to be honest, there are a few things that fall apart a little bit when we talk about luxury features. No four-way adjustable lumbar support. We do finally get the touchscreen, but it's not as easy to use as some of the luxury segment touchscreens. But this is going to be $10,000, $20,000 less expensive than most of the luxury options. So for me, a lot of that really doesn't matter. The warranty is going to be a little bit shorter. Again, I don't think that matters so much because this is going to be significantly less expensive, and you're going to get 90–95% of the luxury experience for 30% less.
Well, I guess one other thing you can mention about the NX is, unlike this, that also gets a plug-in hybrid variant. Of course, like we mentioned earlier, there will be a hybrid coming of this. It's rumored to be a Toyota hybrid system, but this will not be getting any plug-in hybrids. So
yes, yeah. So if you want the plug-in hybrid, you'll have to get the bigger ones. Obviously, that's likely to change at some point in the future, but for the next 5 to 6 years, probably no plug-in hybrid in this form factor. But you know what? That Lexus plug-in hybrid, it is fantastically expensive. And the RAV4 Prime, pretty difficult to find. So, if I were looking for a hybrid in this segment, I would go Tucson hybrid or I would go RAV4 hybrid. I'm not entirely clear what I would wait for this to be hybridized or not. It depends on what kind of hybrid system we end up actually seeing under the hood.
As always, stay tuned for the full review with our full scores and all of our opinions on the car.
Yep, and in the meantime, you can find us over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places. And of course, if you haven't already done so, check out the new EV Buyer's Guide channel by Alex and Autos. You'll find that on YouTube as well.